A tanker did not stop. It negotiated with momentum. Elias Ward had that old line in his head when the gangway under his boot gave a small, ugly slide, and the bright shape of the Meridian Star seemed to move half an inch away from him. The steel was hot through his soles, glazed with a thin fuel film and dusted white where salt had dried along the edges. Havel felt it before Elias could say a word. The Lycanois mix put one paw down, tested the angle, and lost the next step. His body dropped hard against the leash. Elias caught him with his left hand in the rough coat and his right on the rail, shoulder, taking the jolt clean and mean. Pain flashed through his wrist. Behind him, the inspection line checked itself without anyone calling it out. Boots pausing on wet-looking metal, shoulders making room. At the top landing, a crewman folded against the rail, one hand dark against his ribs, eyes fixed on Elias as if the whole ship had narrowed to him. He dragged himself closer, caught Elias by the sleeve, and forced out 5 words. "Don't take the north lane." For a second, nobody gave the warning a place to stand. Below the gangway, the water was too bright to look at. Above it, the tanker breathed heat. Engine vibration came through the metal in a slow animal pulse, steady enough to trust until it was not. The limited inspection team behind Elias stalled in a crooked line, boots searching for dry patches, hands finding rail instead of pride. The crewman swayed, still holding Elias's sleeve. Nobody had to say the boarding point was wrong. The angle was wrong. The way the warm rubber mats had shifted near the top was wrong. Even the rope guide along the rail had the stiff, salt-dried feel of something handled too much by men in a hurry. Elias kept Havel close against his leg and lowered his own center without making a show of it. Men who made shows on ships usually ended up learning from gravity. Havel stood as again, but did not step forward. His rough coat held salt and heat. His ears had gone flat, not in fear, but in a calculation the dog did not own alone. The man smelled of sweat and warm fabric, not mystery, not clue. He was simply hurt and moving on what was left of will. 2 other crewmen moved behind the wounded man and then stopped. Not helping, not leaving. Their eyes went past Elias, past Havel, toward the open deck and the white-painted line that led forward. That look did more than the wound. Elias had seen men look at fire that way, at water rising under a hatch, at a route somebody had called safe in a room far from the thing itself. The white line did not curve like a threat. It sat there clean and official, baked into the deck, ordinary enough to be trusted by anyone who had not watched crewmen refuse to put a boot on it. Havel lifted his head, nostrils working in the heat, then turned away from the crewman and back to the deck. Fuel, salt, sweat, old rope, too many bodies holding still. Too much noise in the air for a clean answer. Elias shortened the leash another inch. He did not ask Havel to solve what men had already started lying about with their feet. The ship was giving Elias too many answers at once, and none of them matched the calm language of an approved lane. The north lane was the approved approach, the one stamped into the inspection packet, the one every safe answer on the chart leaned toward. Elias did not look for the chart. He looked at the crewman's grip, the way the man's hand shook harder when the ship rolled under them, the way Havel's weight stayed back from the top of the gangway even after Elias had him steadied. The team behind him wanted a reason. The tanker gave him surfaces instead. Hot steel. Salt on the rail. A line of crewmen pretending not to watch the same stretch of deck. Somewhere forward, a piece of loose gear knocked once against its bracket and then went quiet inside the larger vibration. Elias eased Havel onto the landing, feeling the dog's hesitation travel up the leash into his palm. His shoulder had begun to throb from the catch, a dull reminder that the ship had already taken payment. The crewman did not let go. Nobody on the landing moved toward the white line. The Meridian Star kept moving, calm and bright, toward a route that had already become a question. The safe thing on paper had started to feel like the first lie. A few steps forward would have made everyone feel committed. Elias held that line back with one hand, and a dog that had already warned him by slipping. Samira Vaish reached the landing before the warning could turn into a rumor. She came up from the team's rear with one hand open and the other already lifting toward Yusuf, not touching him yet, not crowding a wounded man on a moving deck. Elias watched her, read the space faster than most people read faces. Crewmen on the main deck had stopped pretending they were busy. They stood near coils of old rope, beside a low stack of warm rubber chocks, under glare so sharp it flattened distance. Yusuf's grip on Elias's sleeve tightened when Samira spoke to him in his own language. His answer broke into fragments. A place. A lane. A motion with his chin toward the white line forward. Samira listened once, then cut the edge off it when she turned to the team. "He's warning against a northern movement," she said. "We keep control and verify before anyone shifts." It was a careful sentence. Too careful. Elias could feel it spread the wrong way. It gave men permission to wait for a cleaner version of danger, and delay on a deck was never empty. The cost showed up before anyone argued with her. Two crewmen who had been holding near the rail took that carefulness as permission to move. A third followed because bodies did that under heat and fear. They borrowed courage from the first mistake they saw. One man got a boot onto the painted line before Samira crossed his view. Another clipped the warm rubber chock with his heel and bumped sideways into Yusuf's shoulder. The bump made Yusuf's fingers clamp down on Elias's sleeve again, not from drama, just from the body's stupid need to anchor itself to anything upright. "No north," Yusuf said in English this time, rough and small. "Not that way." Samira caught him by the elbow and kept speaking, but the damage had already traveled through the cluster. Men, who had been waiting for permission now, had motioned to imitate. Elias shifted Havel left to keep a gap open, and the dog came with him half a beat late. Not disobedient. Late. His paws found a patch where fuel residue had thinned into a dull skins over the steel, and his head lifted into the wash of sweat, hot paint, rope fiber, and old machinery breath coming out of the open access. Too many living signals in one hot place. Havel wanted a job, but the deck was turning every job into noise. "No," Elias said, low enough that it stayed on the landing. "He doesn't find the problem for us." The younger team member looked embarrassed, and then looked at the deck instead. Better than faith. Samira heard the edge in Elias's voice and looked back at Yusuf. This time she pressed him harder. Yusuf spoke fast, pain chewing the ends off his words. Samira's jaw tightened. She turned toward the crew pocket and lost the careful polish. "Hold the rail. Stay off the painted line. Eyes on me." The crew slowed, but not enough. The man on the painted line stayed there with one foot committed, trapped between obedience and fear. Samira said something in Yusuf's language, shorter and sharper than her first translation. He flinched and looked north, then looked down and away. "Fear outruns translation," she said, almost to herself. Elias could not tell if she meant Yusuf, the crew, or her own first version of the warning. It did not matter. The route had gained bodies, while the words were being made safe. Samira did not defend herself. She moved instead, cutting across the crew's sightline so they had to see her body blocking the easy path. The main deck seemed wider now, not safer. Heat shimmered off the steel and bent the white line until it looked loose under the glare. The tanker kept its steady pulse under Elias's boots. No alarm, no dramatic shift, nothing that would convince a committee in a dry room. Just crewmen moving wrong by inches, then feet. Havel leaned against Elias's leg, his breathing controlled, but faster than it had been on the launch. Elias shortened the leash and put his sore wrist against the rail long enough to take weight off it. Yusuf tried to pull towards Samira, then sagged. She caught his shoulder before he lost balance, and that small rescue stole another second from the deck. The crew cluster ahead had not run. Running would have admitted danger. Instead, they obeyed a route they did not trust, because the softened warning had left them room to pretend. Elias looked from their boots to the painted line to Havel's uncertain stance. The north lane was still unexplained. It was already shaping them. He had boarded a tanker and found a moving argument. The argument was winning by inches. Commander Tessa Rowan reached the main deck with 2 people behind her and no wasted motion. She did not raise her voice. A shouting officer would have given the crew something simple to hate. Tessa gave them limits. "We are not turning verification into a boarding action," she said, clipped enough to cut through heat without feeding panic. "We hold people where we can see them." The inspection team did not have clearance to turn a verification boarding into a fight. They did not have enough people to scatter through a tanker under pressure. If they escalated in the lane, every vessel around them would read panic before anyone read truth. Elias heard the sense in it, which was the problem. Sense did not keep bodies from drifting. Ahead, the painted route pulled crewmen into a thin line along the hot deck. 2 hard-faced men in work shirts had taken positions without announcing themselves, one near the crew access, one by a stack of chocks. They used shoulders, timing, and silence. One stepped into a crewman's avoidance path, almost politely, and the crewman slid closer to the white line to get around him. Another did the same. A third man did not move at all. He let the crew bend around him until the bend became a line. Nadir Qasim stood farther forward, watching feet instead of faces. Tessa's hand came up, palm down, asking for containment. One of her people mirrored the signal and shifted wider, keeping the team from crowding the crew. "We stabilize Yusuf, keep the crew visible, and do not chase a route we do not understand," she said. Nobody freelances. It was clean. It was also late. Yusuf heard enough of it to twist towards Samira, pain pulling his mouth tight. He tried to speak and failed. Samira moved closer, but the crew pocket ahead had already begun to fold in on itself. Heat pressed off the deck in a flat wave. Sweat ran under Elias's collar and dried almost at once. One man came back too fast, shoved by fear more than anyone's hand. His eyes were on Yusuf, then on Havel, then on the open deck behind Elias. He stumbled into the narrow space between the rail and the dog. Havel read the speed, the angle, the reaching hand. His body went hard. Training and heat and noise making one ugly shape out of 3 ordinary things. The leash snapped tight through Elias's sore wrist. Havel drove forward half a step, enough for the crewman to throw both hands up and for 3 more men to recoil from the dog like the warning had grown teeth. Elias caught Havel at the collar and shoulder, taking the weight before it turned into contact. "Back," he said, low and flat. The dog obeyed, but obedience did not undo what the crew had seen. Havel's paws scraped on the hot steel. His chest worked fast against Elias's shin. The crewman he had misread staggered back into another man, and that bump traveled through the pocket like a shove. Elias used his shoulder against the rail to stop the second man from being fed into the painted line, and the rail heat bit through his sleeve. The enforcer by the chocks moved at the same time, not attacking, just turning one shoulder and narrowing a gap until the frightened crewman chose the white line because it looked like air. Elias saw the trick and could not stop all of it. Crew trust went anyway. He felt it leave in the angle of their bodies. They had been frightened of a lane. Now they were frightened of the dog brought by the men telling them not to move. Samira saw it too. Her shoulders shifted toward the crew instead of the team. Tessa looked at Havel, then at Elias, not accusing him, not forgiving him either. She was counting damage. Nadir had not moved. He did not need to. He watched the feet he had bent. The option to withdraw sat there, clean and useless. They could step back down the gangway, report an unstable crew, request authority that would arrive after the ship had committed to the lane. They could contain the landing and watch crewmen feed themselves into a pattern somebody else had prepared. Tessa was right about escalation. Elias hated that she was right. He hated more that the right answer, used at the wrong angle, became another hand on the crew's backs. The deck vibrated under him, steady as breath. Salt crystals rasped under his palm when he shifted on the rail. Havel settled, but the damage had been done. Yusuf sagged against Samira, eyes fixed on the men ahead. He did not repeat the warning. He did not need to. The North Lane was no longer only a place on a route plan. It was the direction bodies took when fear, command, and pressure all pushed at once. Elias eased Havel behind his leg and looked at the white line, the crew cluster, the silent men holding the angles. Leaving would not get them out of danger. It would leave everyone else inside the shape of it. The crew movement broke first at the middle, where two frightened men tried to obey the painted line and avoid the silent enforcer at the same time. That kind of split got people crushed. Elias saw it in the hips, in the shoulders, in the way Yusuf's weight had begun to drag Samira toward the rail. The Meridian Star rolled almost nothing, just enough to make a man commit his balance before the deck took the promise back. Tessa was still behind him, holding her line because her order had not become wrong yet. It had become insufficient. Nadir's men had left one opening, and that was the thing Elias did not like. Real openings on ships were ugly. This one looked clean. White paint, clear path, forward movement. Too easy. The glare made distance look flatter than it was. A rail shadow cut across the paint and hid the slight change in deck angle beyond it. Elias put Havel against his left leg and felt the dog tense without surging. Narrower. Useful. Move Yusuf off the line, Elias said to Samira. She did not ask which line. She had learned that much already. He took the first step before the crew could decide for him. Not fast. Fast made crowds stupid. He angled toward the rail, using his body as a slow wedge, shoulder turned to take bumps instead of giving them. The heat made the deck slick in patches where old residue had gone soft, and the rail was too hot to hold for more than a breath. Elias used it anyway. A tanker did not stop. It negotiated with momentum. He said it under his breath. Not for anyone else. And let the rhythm tell him when to shift. The hull's vibration came through his boots. The crew pocket swayed with it half a beat late. That was the gap. Samira moved Yusuf into it, one hand under his arm, one hand keeping his head up. Yusuf tried to help and only put weight in the wrong places. With me, Samira told him. Do not look north. A crewman in front of her froze as Nadir's man crossed toward the pocket. Havel stepped into the crewman's sightlines, not lunging, just big enough and near enough to stop the panic from spilling backward. Seconds. The younger man swallowed and moved aside. Samira used the gap without thanking anyone, because gratitude took breath, and breath was in short supply. Yusuf muttered something that was almost a curse. Holt, still forward, slapped one palm against the rail to pull a crewman's eyes off the white line. The little sounds mattered more than speeches now. Boots dragging, rope scraping, a man swallowing panic before it became a shout. The enforcer reached the rail beside the moving pocket and put his hand on it as if claiming furniture. The hand changed everything. It gave the crew a wall where Elias needed motion. Elias did not strike him. He shifted the crowd instead, taking one ugly half-step with his sore shoulder into the pressure and letting the tanker's faint roll do the rest. The rail burned through his sleeve. A man's elbow struck his ribs. Havel held tight at his knee, body angled just enough to make the enforcer count the dog without giving him a target. The enforcer tried to match the movement and found himself behind the pocket instead of in front of it. Not beaten. Late. Late mattered. The crew cluster shifted off the painted route. 3 bodies, then 5, then Yusuf between Samira and an older deckhand with trembling hands. The official line ahead narrowed beside stacked gear and a low rail where glare hid the change in height. A man, stepping there with his eyes on a threat, would lose his footing. Elias did not need a map to know it. He needed the way the ship argued under his feet. Warm rubber gave under one heel. Salt scraped across the rail beneath his palm. From the forward side, a sharp voice cut through the metal, thick air. Captain Darius Holt had come out near the crew axis, face gray with heat and restraint. "Not that way," he called. Then, lower, rougher, as if he regretted giving even that much away. "My crew doesn't use that line when she's running hot." Holt's warning landed too late to make the safe path safe, but early enough to make the ugly one real. Elias caught Samira's glance and pointed with 2 fingers toward the darker access beyond the rope locker, not giving a procedure, just a direction bodies could understand. "Move," he said. No bunching. The move pulled them away from Nadir's clean line and toward the ship's less public spaces, where the air coming out felt warmer and carried the stale press of machinery and old labor. Immediate danger loosened. Position got worse. The enforcer who had crossed toward them stopped with one palm, still on the rail, the skin reddening where heat had taken its share. Farther forward, Nadir's head turned a few inches. Not anger. Adjustment. He had noticed the pattern break. Tessa said Elias's name behind him, warning and permission tangled together. He did not look back. Yusuf stumbled once, caught himself on Samira, and kept moving, because stopping would have given the deck back to someone else. Havel stayed tight against Elias, breath faster now but controlled. The painted route stayed bright in the glare behind them. Still official, still wrong. Ahead waited heat, tighter passage, fuels, stained metal, and whatever the ship had been hiding from visitors who still believed in clean routes. The darker access beyond the rope locker gave them less room and more heat. It was not a corridor so much as a squeezed service run between metal faces, one side sweating old warmth from machinery, the other marked by lockers with stained vents and handles polished by nervous hands. Yusuf dragged his feet twice before Samira adjusted under his arm. The crew behind them came in broken pieces, still watching Havel as much as the men pushing them from the deck. Elias felt that distrust in the leash. Havel stayed tight, head low, body ready but not clean. His paws found a patch where fuel residue had gathered along the lip of a locker. The dog stopped hard. His shoulders rose. His nose cut toward the locker seam, then toward the passage bend, then back again. For one thin second, the cue fit too well. Bad route. Bad metal. A closed option that might hide the answer. Elias's body believed it before his judgment caught up. He lifted a hand to stop the crew. "Hold," he said. The word landed heavier than he meant it to. Behind them, movement tightened on the deck they had left. Even the engine seemed to press the pause inward. Samira froze with Yusuf against her side. The older deckhand bumped into them. Then another man bumped into him. The whole group compressed around the bad patch of metal and heat. Elias's wrist throbbed where the leash pulled across it. Havel strained toward the locker, not barking, not lunging, simply insisting with every line of his body that something there deserved attention. Elias wanted to trust that. A dog gave a cleaner answer than a briefing, cleaner than command language, cleaner than a route named safe by people who were not standing in this metal throat. He let the pause stretch one breath too long. That was enough. A shout came from behind, swallowed by machinery vibration and returned flatter, closer. One of Nadir's men had found their turn. A crewman at the back tried to squeeze away from him and got pinned for a second against the passage wall, shoulder twisted, unable to move forward or back. Another crewman grabbed for him and missed, knuckles striking metal hard enough to make the man curse through his teeth. Yusuf coughed once and folded, dragging Samira down a half step. The delay had become weight. It had become heat and panic and bodies with nowhere useful to go. Havel's pause shifted again in the residue. His tongue showed at the edge of his mouth. His coat felt hotter against Elias's shin than it had in deck. Elias saw it then. Not certainty. Overload. The locker breathed fuel warmth and trapped machine heat into the narrow run, and Havel had been asked to read truth through a dirty window while every human body around him shook fear into the air. The dog had not chosen wrong. Elias had. He pulled Havel back with both hands, gentler than the urgency deserved. He wasn't wrong. He was hot. Samira looked at him, then at the locker, then at the crew trapped behind them. Something in her face gave way, not loudly. No confession fit the space. She got Yusuf upright and shoved her free hand toward the pinned crewman, dragging him clear with help from the deckhand before he could panic harder. The North Advisory had been built on a normal transit profile, she said. Normal crew movement. Normal heat load. Normal compliance. She had helped pass language that made it sound firmer than it was. Nothing here was normal. Not the ship running hot, not men, hurting bodies, not a wounded crewman begging against the approved lane. Samira did not ask for forgiveness. She made the admission work by moving people. The passage behind them tightened with voices and feet. They had lost the clean distance Elias had bought on deck. Worse, they had stopped in a place that made every next movement narrower, and the pause had given Nadir's man the bend. Havel came back against Elias's leg, rough coat hot through the fabric, breathing faster but still trying to work. Elias put his palm briefly on the dog's neck, not comfort, not apology, just a reset both of them understood. The north lane was not a betrayal drawn by a hidden hand. That would have been easier. It had been safe for a ship that still matched the assumptions. This ship did not. This crew did not. The pressure behind them did not. A safe lane is only safe for the ship it was designed for, Samira said, the words rougher than policy ever allowed. Ahead, the service run split into a darker hatch to the left and a strip of exposed light farther on. Behind them, the first of Nadir's men entered the bend. Official route gone. Dog certainty gone. The next choice would have to be made without either comfort, and with armed men closing too fast. The darker hatch looked like mercy. It sat low in the left wall of the service run, half-shadowed by heat-stained metal, with a narrow lip worn smooth by hands that knew the ship better than visitors ever would. Beyond it, the space dropped out of sight. Cooler, maybe. Shorter, almost certainly. The strip of exposed light farther ahead looked worse in every honest way. It promised glare, hot rail, open deck, and more time under the eyes of men who had already learned how to move a crowd without touching it. Yusuf pointed weakly toward the hatch, as if memory had pulled his arm up before judgment could stop it. 2 crewmen leaned that way. One put a hand on the hot edge and jerked it back, then leaned again anyway. Samira saw the same thing and looked at Elias, not asking permission, asking whether he had a better answer. Havel stood at Elias's knee, still hot from the false alert, his breath too quick under control. The hatch breathed stale warmth. Not a smell that solved anything. A boundary. Behind them, Nadir's first man came around the bend with the slow confidence of someone watching a mistake begin and deciding how long to let it live. Elias stepped between Havel and the hatch. That was the decision before the words. His wrist hurt, his shoulder hurt, and the part of him that had just misread Havel wanted the shortcut like a thirsty man wanted bad water. Shorter meant distance from the men behind them. Shorter meant Yusuf might stay on his feet. Shorter meant Samira would not have to drag a wounded man through glare. Shorter was a liar with good timing. Elias put his palm on the hatch edge and took it off again. The metal held still heat, different from the living deck, a dead pocket of it. Havel's ears shifted forward, then flattened. He did not need to understand the space. Elias did. This is a no-dog space. The words came out flat. A crewman swore under his breath and tried to look past Elias into the dark. Elias moved his shoulder into the man's line without touching him. Samira's face tightened. Judgment, she said low, or the last mistake talking. Fair question. Cruel timing. Elias kept his eyes on the hatch, then on Havel's paws, then on Yusuf sagging against her. Judgment, he said. If it kills him, it kills the rest of us slower. He did not give them a lecture. The hatch did not deserve one. The exposed route waited ahead, bright enough to make the air look thin. It ran along a service edge where the rail caught sun and the deck gave no kindness to paws or hands. Elias hated it less than the hatch, which was not the same as trusting it. He pointed toward the light and started moving before the crew could vote themselves into the dark. Samira shifted Yusuf around with a grunt. The older deckhand took Yusuf's other side without being told. Orders were slow. Usefulness was faster. Havel followed tight, no lead, no searching, just body discipline and heat held under fur. Behind them, the enforcer at the bend raised his pace. Not much. Enough. The delay had invited him closer. Another shape appeared behind him, shoulder first, blocking the view back toward the main deck. The route narrowed from choice to consequence. Elias felt the crew understand it in pieces. The shortcut was gone, the official line was gone, and the dog was no longer an answer they could borrow. There was only the bad open way and the cost of taking it. Salt rasped under Elias's boot. The ship's vibration changed as they neared the open deck, wider, harsher, less forgiving. They came out into the light, and heat took them like a hand across the mouth. Havel's stride shortened on the first few steps. Elias saw it and said nothing yet, because naming a cost did not pay it. He shifted the leash to keep Havel closer to his own shadow, and moved the crew along the rail, where the angle gave them a little cover from each other, if not from the sun. Samira looked back once. The men behind had gained the bend. The longer route had bought survival from one danger and sold time to another. Elias kept moving. Yusuf's breath scraped. The older deckhand whispered something to him that might have been encouragement or prayer. Ahead, the exposed path ran toward another break in the structure, not clean, not official, not kind. Behind them, Nadir's pressure had stopped being theory and started sounding like feet in the passage. Havel stayed with Elias, still working, still limited, still alive, because Elias had refused the faster wrong answer. The next stretch would punish that choice. He could already see it in the dog's paws, and in the way the hot deck shone ahead. The exposed deck punished the choice before it punished the people. Heat came up through the soles first, then through the air, then off the rail until there was no clean place to put a hand. Elias kept Havel tight on his left, using his own shadow when the angle gave him any, which was not often. The dog tried to hold pace for the first stretch. He did it out of training, not comfort. His shoulders stayed square, his head stayed low, and the leash kept that steady working tension Elias trusted more than most spoken promises. Then the tension changed. Small thing. Half a beat late at the step over a raised seam. A paw set down and came back too quickly. Havel did not yelp. Working dogs rarely gave a man the courtesy of clear paperwork. They charged interest in smaller ways. Shorter stride. Head dip. A rough swallow. Elias felt it travel up the leash and into his sore wrist. Behind them, the passage they had left gave back the sound of feet closing. Not running yet. Worse. Measured enough to mean the men behind were no longer guessing. They were collecting the cost of his longer route. Elias slowed without making it look like stopping. He angled the group along the rail, letting the older deckhand and Samira carry Yusuf between them, while the crew bunched and stretched in bad rhythm. A coil of thin line had come loose near a stanchion, and one crewman kicked it aside too late, catching his own boot and bumping the man behind him. "Rail," Samira snapped. "Hold rail, keep moving." The rail burned the side of Elias's hand when he tested it. He took the burn and used it anyway, buying a little balance while he watched Havel's feet. The pads did not fail. They argued. Salt grit, hot steel, old residue in the shallow deck seams, all of it asked more from the dog than the briefing had ever imagined. Elias bent just enough to put 2 fingers near Havel's shoulder and feel the heat under the coat. Too much. The dog glanced up at him, ready to be given the next task, because that was the cruel part. Havel would keep offering until Elias became the one smart enough to refuse. "Close only," Elias said, low. The words were for himself as much as the dog. No leading. No searching. No answer borrowed from a body already paying for every step. Havel shifted closer to his knee. Samira heard the change in Elias's voice and understood more than he wanted her to. She moved ahead of Yusuf by half a step and began working the crew with her hands and her tone. Not a lecture, not comfort, just small commands that gave frightened men something better to do than stare at the dog. She put one man on Yusuf's far side, sent another to hold the rail at the turn, told a third to keep eyes forward, not back. Her words were sharper now, stripped of the softness that had cost them earlier. The crew obeyed in pieces, but pieces counted. Yusuf dragged in a breath and said something to her that Elias could not catch over the deck vibration. Samira answered fast, then looked at Elias. "Your dog trusts me less than the diplomats." The line should not have worked under that sun, with men behind them and Havel's pause beginning to shorten. It did, barely. A pressure valve opened and shut. Elias kept his eyes on the route ahead. That's why he's still alive. The nearest crewman almost smiled, then remembered where he was and moved faster. Humor was useful only if it made feet work. Samira did not smile. She kept talking to the crew, cutting panic into tasks. The delay caught up anyway. One of Nadir's men appeared at the edge of the exposed stretch, dark against the heat shimmer, close enough now that the crew could feel him without looking. Another shape moved behind him. The longer route had taken Havel's pace and given the enemy distance. Fair trade only if they found something Nadir did not already own. Elias looked ahead and saw no official mercy. The painted route was gone from view. The hatch was behind them. Havel could not lead. The men from the inspection team could not spread out without tearing the crew apart. Only the ship's own people still had knowledge left that Nadir might not have bent into shape. Elias adjusted the leash so Havel stayed at his thigh, not ahead of it. Close protection. Nothing more. It felt like cutting a tool in half and being grateful the half still had teeth. Samira had reached the same wall from the human side. She turned to Yusuf and the older deckhand. No softness left now, no management. "There is another way," she said. "Tell me now." Behind, the measured feet grew louder. Ahead, the deck glared empty and wrong. They were out of clean routes, out of dog-led certainty, out of the polite fiction that official lines and safe choices were the same thing under sun, pressure, and men who knew how to herd fear. Samira did not ask for the crew route like a favor. Favors belonged to rooms with chairs and water pitchers. She asked like the next wrong second would kill somebody. She put herself in front of Yusuf and the older deckhand, face turned toward the crew instead of the inspection team, and stopped polishing the truth. "The north lane is wrong for this ship now," she told them. "The official line has been shaped. The dog can't lead us." Elias watched the words hit differently because she did not sand them down. Men who had ignored careful language listened to the ugly version. Yusuf lifted his head, sweat shining along his jaw, and spoke past pain to the deckhand. "Crew way," he rasped, and the deckhand flinched like the words had been pulled from a locked drawer. Samira caught the flinch. "Say it," she told him. Not loud. Honest enough to make hiding look worse than speaking. Behind them, Nadir's men reached the open stretch and spread just enough to make every known route feel smaller. Havel stayed at Elias's thigh, close protection only, ears moving with the pressure behind them. His paws were still under him, but the confidence was smaller now, rationed by heat and steel. Elias could feel the dog wanting more work. He could also feel the heat taking the answer away. Captain Holt appeared at the far edge of the service break, one hand braced on a rail, his shirt dark at the collar and his eyes on his own crew before they ever found Elias. He looked like a man who had spent too long deciding which truth would do the least damage. "You heard him," Samira said. Holt's mouth tightened. The older deckhand started talking fast, and Holt cut him off with a shake of his head. He looked toward the narrow run beyond the service piping, where sun struck the deck in broken strips and a low lip forced anyone moving through to turn sideways. "Crew way," he said. The words came out bitter. Not for inspectors. Yusuf added a phrase that made two crewmen flinch, and Samira translated it without mercy. It was hotter, exposed, ugly on the feet, bad for a wounded man, and invisible to anyone who expected visitors to stay on painted lines. "Single file after the lip," Holt said. "Hands on steel only where it's shaded. Do not stop in the turn." Not a map. A lived warning. Elias looked at the route and hated it immediately. Real ways out rarely looked clean. Havel leaned against his leg, breathing fast. Elias shortened the leash another inch and nodded. He would not ask the dog to lead it. He would ask him to survive it. Tessa caught up as the first crewman turned toward the crew way. One of her people started to object, not loudly, but with the stiff voice of a man trying to keep an operation inside its box. Tessa raised her hand and stopped him. When he shifted anyway, she moved her body half a step into his path and made the stop physical enough for him to obey. "Back," she said. Her eyes did not leave the route. The gestures was small enough to deny later and clear enough to matter now. Her gaze found Elias, then Samira, then the crew route that no inspection packet would have blessed without 3 committees and a dead hour. "I am not authorizing an uncontrolled movement," she said. It sounded like a refusal. Then she stepped away from the opening and kept her team from filling it. "I am also not blocking crew movement under immediate hazard." Costly language. The kind that made reports come alive later with teeth. Samira understood the price before the crew did. Her face tightened, but she did not waste thanks on it. She turned back to the men and gave them the first order as if it had come from the ship itself. Yusuf and the deckhand moved together, rough and imperfect. Holt pointed once with 2 fingers, not drawing a map, only giving the next body a place to go. The first crewman caught his hip on the low lip and swore, but he kept moving. A second nearly stopped behind him, saw Samira's hand cut down, and kept his feet alive. The route opened 1 person at a time. Nadir's model broke in the space between 2 steps. Elias saw it happen before any man shouted. The enforcers had been holding angles built around obedience: painted line, visitor path, clean access, frightened crew choosing the obvious way. The crew way bent that pattern. It forced bodies across heat and awkward footing along a path nobody would choose unless the ship had made the choice for them. One of Nadir's men moved to cut it off and arrived wrong, too far forward, his pressure falling behind the first 3 crewmen instead of in front of them. Another hesitated, and that hesitation sent a visible ripple through the men behind him. Predictability had been their weapon. Samira had just taken the grip off it. The victory lasted maybe 2 breaths. Nadir saw it by watching the feet. His stillness changed first. Then he moved. Not fast, not angry. Direct. He left the clean line and came toward the crew way himself, no longer content to herd from distance. Havel felt the shift and pressed against Elias's leg, tired but present. Elias put himself between the dog, Yusuf, and the opening. The route was unlocked. It was worse than anything official had offered. It was also theirs, which meant Nadir would have to take it from them with his own hands. Nadir came into the crewway as if he owned the heat. He had no need to shout. The men behind him had already done the shouting. With their bodies, with the angles they held, with the clean paths they made look safer than the ugly one. Now the ugly one was working, and that brought him out from the edges. Elias felt the shift in the crew before he saw Nadir's hand come up. Men stopped breathing all at once. The low lip of deck under the crew way forced bodies sideways, shoulder first, 1 person through at a time. It was bad terrain for comfort and worse terrain for command. The ship had finally given them something neither side fully owned, though it charged everyone hard for using it. Yusuf was 2 bodies into the route, sagging between Samira and the deckhand. Holt had a hand on the next rail, dragging crew through with the hard impatience of a captain who had run out of lies. Havel pressed against Elias's thigh, tired heat coming off him in waves. Close protection. Nothing more. Nadir stepped toward the opening, and the whole route tightened around his presence. "Move and I close it," Nadir said. No flourish. Just a fact delivered to frightened men. The first enforcer tried to widen the pressure by moving along the rail. A crewman flinched and almost backed into Yusuf. Samira shoved herself into the gap, not brave in any pretty way, just practical and furious, using her body to keep the wounded man moving. "Go," she snapped at the deckhand, and this time nobody waited for a softer version. Holt caught the next man and pulled him through the bad angle. The deck rolled slightly under them, small enough to deny, strong enough to betray a locked knee. Nadir used that roll better than a man should have. He crossed the exposed strip without haste, cutting toward Samira and Yusuf, forcing Elias to choose between the dog at his leg and the people at the mouth of the crewway. Elias moved before the choice got cleaner. He aimed to take Nadir off the opening with shoulder and momentum, ugly but possible. Nadir read the first angle. He let Elias commit to the rail side, then shifted half a step and turned the opening into a trap. Elias's sore shoulder met a rail upright and fire ran down his arm. His boot found grit, not grip. For one bad breath he had no leverage at all. Nadir leaned into that breath and almost turned it into control, using Elias's own forward weight to block the route again. Samira saw it before the crew did. She shoved Yusuf lower and took the ugly angle herself, buying inches with her shoulder and balance she did not have to spare. Havel stayed with him, not ahead, not searching. The leash stayed short. The dog's breath was rough now, each pull coming with a hitch, but when Nadir reached towards Samira, Havel saw the one thing he was still allowed to answer. It was not a charge. It was not a miracle. Havel drove into the space between Nadir's arm and Samira's ribs with every tired pound he had left. A rough, controlled burst that made Nadir turn his weight wrong. 2 seconds. Maybe less. Enough, if everyone spent them. Samira dropped her shoulder and pulled Yusuf down and sideways instead of back. The deckhand slammed his hip into the rail to keep them from falling through the turn. Holt hauled the next crewman clear and shoved him low through the ugly lip. A younger crewman froze at the opening, eyes gone wide, and Samira hit him with her voice. Through, now. He went. Elias used the opening the way a man used a door that would never open twice. He hit Nadir low with his body. Not clean, not elegant, all heat and bad footing, and the old pain in his wrist making one ugly bargain. Nadir fought for balance and got one hand into Elias's shirt, pulling him into the same fall. The ship took sides for half a breath. Nadir's heel found the slick edge, where fuel residue and salt had been ground into the deck by too many boots. Elias felt the weight shift and drove through it until they struck the rail together. Pain opened bright in his ribs and took most of the air he had left. Havel fell back against his leg, front paws skidding once before he caught himself, done and still trying to stand because nobody had told his body the job was over. Nadir did not fall overboard. Life was rarely that neat. He hit the rail hard enough to lose the root, and that was what mattered. Holt and 2 crewmen were on him before he could turn the pressure back into shape. Not heroes. Men with burned hands and bad tempers, and the sudden knowledge that the path behind them was not closing anymore. One of Nadir's men stepped in and then stopped too far away, caught between the route he had expected and the one already moving past him. Tessa's people finally moved, not rescuing the moment, only sealing the edges of what the moment had already cost. The last crewman pushed through the awkward lip. Samira dragged Yusuf with him, face white under sweat, still giving orders because stopping would make the pain mean less. Elias got one hand into Havel's coat and felt the dog trembling under it. Not fear. Empty tank. The exposed deck rang with heat, breath, and bodies trying not to collapse. Nadir's predictability was broken. The crew route held. Elias's ribs argued with every breath, and his wrist had gone weak around the leash. The Meridian Star kept moving, no kinder for having spared them, toward whatever safer water they had bought with 2 seconds and too much skin. By the time the Meridian Star steadied on the safer vector, nobody called it victory. The ship had not become quiet. It had become ordinary again, in the cruel way machines did after taking their share. Men leaned against railings with salt dried on their sleeves. Yusuf sat on a folded mat near the holding area, head bowed, one hand closed around the edge as if the deck still wanted him back. Holt stood by him, answering the same question 3 different ways for 3 different uniforms, each answer smaller than the last. The north lane had fallen astern without ceremony. No bell announced the change. No one cheered when the tanker stopped feeding itself into the pattern Nadir had wanted. Elias sat on a warm storage crate with Havel against his boot and his ribs wrapped tight enough to make breathing honest. Every inhale found the rail impact. Every shift found the wrist. Someone had told him he would not leave the ship before a statement and a second medical look. He had nodded. Running from questions was for men who thought accountability was optional cargo. Havel lay with his head up, because pride was apparently not limited to humans, but his front paws stayed tucked and still. A handler could read a working dog's silence. This one said bench, water, shade, and no argument. The first truth leaked through people who were too tired to keep it tidy. It moved through crew first, then into the open air, carried by men who had stopped asking whether anyone had cleared them to speak. Yusuf said the line again, for a crewman filming nothing in particular. His voice cracked down to almost air. Don't take the north lane. Not a curse. Not drama. A route warning that had survived heat, translation, fear, and men who profited from obedience. Holt confirmed the crew weight existed and had been kept off inspection movement, except when the ship made fools of approved paths. That was not a confession. It was worse for the people who liked clean folders. It sounded practical. Samira stood a few feet away, with her credential already removed from the clip at her chest. She had taken it off herself before anyone could make a ceremony of it. A message waited on her dark phone screen. Access suspended pending review. Another followed before she could lock the screen. Contract channel disabled. She held the plastic card in one hand, thumb pressed over her name, while Tessa spoke into a handset with her back half turned. Elias could not hear every word. He heard enough. Unauthorized movement. Immediate hazard. Advisory language. Command discretion. A pause. Then Tessa said, "Put my name on that wording." Phrases that did not save anyone, but might still bite the people who had. Tessa came over when she finished, not as a rescuer and not as a judge. More like a woman measuring where the blast had finally decided to land. Her face had the tired flatness of someone who had done one correct thing that would read badly in a room full of chairs. "There will be questions," she said. Elias almost laughed, but his ribs advised against it. Questions were the cheapest cargo in the world. "There should be," he said. She looked at Havel first. That raised her a little, in his opinion. The dog's rough coat held dried salt and deck heat. His eyes stayed open, but the body had spent what it had. One front paw twitched when a crewman's boots scraped too close, then settled again. A team tech set Havel's crate in the shade made by stacked gear and hesitated before looking at Elias. Not cleared. The man did not have to say it. Elias touched Havel's shoulder and felt the heat stills held there. "He's done for a while," Elias said. The words cost more than he liked. Tessa nodded once. Samira heard it and looked away toward the crew, where two men were pretending not to listen. Her cover was gone. Maybe not officially in all the right systems yet. Official things lagged behind reality. That had nearly killed them once already. Nadir was no longer on the deck. That mattered less than it should have. The pressure he had used remained in the way people avoided the painted lines even now. In the way Holt's crew kept glancing at the safer vector as if a heading could lie twice. One young crewman stepped around the white paint with a careful, embarrassed detour, then looked angry that his own feet had betrayed him. Elias stayed seated until standing would be useful instead of proud. Havel's crate waited open, towel inside, water clipped to one corner. No applause followed when Elias helped him into it. The dog stepped in carefully, paused once, and lay down with a sigh that had no poetry in it at all. Samira walked past Elias with the credential still in her hand. "I made the lane sound safer than it was," she said. Not a plea. A fact with blood on the edge. Elias looked at the crew, at Yusuf alive and shaking, at Holt giving the same rough truth again, at Tessa already losing the clean version of her day. "Then make the next statement harder to sand down," he said. The ship kept moving. The partial truth moved with it, looseness out of every hand that had tried to hold it still.